brushes. So this is probably the first video that I'll be covering because it's the most important one. It's the one that frustrates the students most and frustrates me the most because brushes, they have so many different uses, and if they get out of balance, their use is, well, hard to use. Just like a hammer has the ability to pound a nail, destroy an egg, pull a nail out from a surface, it has a lot of uses for a hammer. Just like a brush. Brushes have a lot of uses. Just one brush can do a ton of things. So let's go into Cube. Let's hit Shift D and get to level 9. So before I talk about the brushes, let's talk about over here on these attributes. So size, you could change it with the slider, or you can use the bracket keys on the keyboard. This brush right here, the sculpt brush, looks like this by default. So it's great for filling in a surface or changing its form, like a big huge change. But now let's say I want a more layered approach to things. Well, if you go down here below, you have buildup. So buildup right now is at 50%. If I went to its extreme, 100%, I have now more of a layered approach. Now these applications I'm talking about are across all sculpting applications. So just about all sculpting applications have kind of a layered brush or more of a standard brush, just as Mudbox does. In this case, it's all on one brush. In all sculpting applications, there is a thing called Falloff. So Falloff is how it translates to the surface. In this case, this kind of curve it's doing. Just know that you'll be changing Falloff. It's nothing that you just keep into its standard form. Learn how to change it because you can do a lot with it. If you go to Falloff, there's some presets here. So I can move these little points around and get to something like this, or I can have a default a default setting right here. And if I ever want to store it, I can just store it using this feature. So here's this brush with a different type of Falloff. You'll notice that it has these little dots. Now if you were intending that, that's great. But if you wanted to change that, that's called spacing. Again, that's in all sculpting applications, spacing. So in the fall off, you could choose something like this where it has a nice fall off. You could choose a peaked fall off. Or you're going to be changing this a lot, and we'll do that via stamps here in a second. I'm going to go back to this pointy one. Okay. That way I can cover up here. Stamp spacing. So I could turn stamp spacing completely off, and look what I have. Just a hodgepodge of messiness, right? If I have stamp spacing on and I just turn it down, I have a nice uniformed sculpt. Now, because the buildup is set at 100%, I have this. If I lightly press on my Wacom tablet, I get the very fine. If I hog down on it, I get this. So by changing the buildup back to 50%, I can kind of control that where it would only have a fine line, and that's it. No matter how hard I hog down on this thing, it's always going to have a fine line. So much to absorb only on this one brush using some of these features. I'm not going to cover snap to curve yet because, well, we're not to curves yet. But let's go to stamp. Okay, so stamp, and let's go to stamp. Many stamps below, and what stamp you choose might not be what you want. Let's say you wanted a very tiled look with this brush. Well, you're going to get more of an alligator skin. So let's change some attributes about this. One, in the stamp feature, you can see that there's this curve. Okay, this is kind of like a way of keeping it or orientating it towards the brush direction. So with this off, and if I do that very same stroke, you can see I get a very different look. I usually keep this feature on, but again, there are times when you have to turn it off. These features right here just rotate this image or stamp. So now I have more of that compared to that. This just flips it horizontally and vertically. Now, these three features right here can happen real time randomly. So if you go to random and turn this all the way down, and let's turn rotate all the way up, what was once snakeskin becomes more of a rocked surface. Scale on, and you get all kinds of crazy. So combining these features together with some alpha that you've created so you have a stamp, you can see why Mudbox gets very frustrating for some students, because you have to know what these things do over here, and if you don't, you're going to be just randomly just touching these buttons. And that's good to learn with some guidance, I think. Alright, now, with the standard default stamp off, and just the brush like this, what if I wanted to push in on the surface? Well, I could use invert function, but I like using control. So, you can make it bump up on the surface, or rip into the surface using control, held down. Also, symmetry, very important, super important. So I wanted to symmetry across this surface right here and have all the changes from left to right. First off, I would have to find out which mirror I'm in. In this case, just by hovering over these, it allows you a preview. So X is the symmetry point here. That means if I go like this, perfect. And then I can also rip into the surface using control. The strength is something I go over here and change because it's something you don't want to really hotkey too much. I like keeping a nice uniformed strength. So in this case, this brush and this strength, you can see it doesn't tear so much at a lower level. So now you're getting a very nice representation of that fall off occurring. Too much strength and it's out the window, right? You're starting to get really hard tears on the surface, and that's going to produce really bad normal maps. So keeping this low is a lot better. Again, that's something I change manually. Now I'm going to break this video up into two, so I'll cover some more in the next video.